Welcome to Thursfields Talk Legal, a vidcast series from one of the leading law firms in the Midlands. I'm Steve Dyson, a journalist who's talking to a range of solicitors at Thursfields on legal topics of wide interest to the public or businesses. Today's episode is all about insolvency and how it could become a phoenix from the ashes of COVID-19. Here to explain that subject is Stephen Roan. He's a director in the Dispute Resolution Department at Thursfields Solicitors, and he's an expert in contentious insolvency matters. Hello to you, Stephen.
Good morning, Steve, and thank you for inviting me to take part today.
No problem, Stephen. I want to discuss the subject of insolvency with you and to explore how this could become, as you say, a phoenix from the ashes of COVID-19. But first of all, let's understand some of the terminology used, because there are a number of different phrases which people could get mixed up. So first of all, what exactly is insolvency?
Yeah. Well, insolvency I use is a very general term where it could be in reference to a company or an individual, and it's where they're in serious financial difficulty. So essentially where they're unable to pay their debts when due. So you can have a situation, for example, where someone has insufficient cash to be able to pay their costs and expenses. A typical example could be the quarterly VAT bill to HMRC. And then there are other situations, a lot more serious, where, for example, whilst they might have assets like properties, even if they were to sell all their assets, they're still not going to raise enough money to be able to pay off their liabilities. And so, essentially businesses and companies, they go through this journey where they could be profitable, they're expanding, they're in good financial health, they're paying their suppliers, profits are being made at the end of the year, and dividends are being paid to shareholders or to the owners of the businesses. But unfortunately, some companies do end up going into financial difficulty. So you've got someone that may have owed them money, and that supplier may have gone under, or customer may have become bankrupt, and so they're not getting paid a very large invoice they may be expecting. And so that may have a knock-on effect to their business, preventing them from paying their own suppliers. So you're in this difficult financial situation. The forecast that you may have come up with, so your expected sales for the year may not have been achieved, and you're finding that the costs of running your business are now exceeding your income. So, the owner or the financial director in the company, or even the company's accountants, we're looking at the management information, looking at the day-to-day accounts, and seeing that the company or the business is in financial distress. And so, they may look to exercises like simple cost cutting or reducing overheads. And there may be other more serious measures needed to be taken. So, for example, you may have to look at redundancies and reducing your workforce to help bring down the cost to the business. But I think once the owner realises that they're getting into that difficult financial situation, it's probably time that they should consider engaging a professional. And for this type of situation, you turn to an insolvency practitioner.
Okay, the meaning of insolvency is clear in my mind, Stephen. So let's explore the other terms we come across when a company is in financial difficulty. For instance, administration, company voluntary arrangements, what's known as CVAs, liquidation, bankruptcy. What do those kind of phrases mean?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Steve. So I think probably let's actually put those phrases in terms of the reality of what's happening out in the economy at the moment. So the first one you asked was administration, and a classic shirt maker. A lot of us like our shirts at work, and TM Lewin went into administration this year. So that is where a company may be reorganised or its assets realised for the benefit, with having the benefit of a statutory moratorium in place. So that basically prevents creditors taking action into the company against the company whilst it's trying to sort out its affairs. And ultimately, it can lead to the business surviving and being rescued and going back to profitability. The next classic sort of phrase that's used when you're talking about insolvency is the pre-pack. So this is usually a situation where the business knows that it's in financial difficulty, and what they're doing is that they're going to have a pre-arranged sale, but use the administration as the vehicle for that. So the furniture retailer, Oak Furniture Land, that went through a pre-pack administration. So essentially, they lined up a buyer of the business or the assets of the company, appointed an administrator, and the sale took place pretty much shortly thereafter. The company voluntary arrangement, or the CVA, is what Debenhams went through last year. So this is where there's some form of compromise or an arrangement agreed with the various creditors of the company. Again, an insolvency practitioner is involved in that situation rather than being called administrator, reference the sort of supervisor. And they supervise that arrangement and trying to see through this sort of agreement between the creditors. The majority of creditors vote to accept sort of a proposal that could be, for example, accepting a reduced amount of the total amount owed to you, and each creditor sort of accepts sort of a fair share of that reduced amount. And then sort of the most serious situation, I suppose, a company can find itself in is the liquidation scenario. And this one is effectively what happened to Thomas Cook, which, whilst it was a well-known high street name, has been there for a number of years, it ultimately got to a situation where it couldn't survive. So it went into liquidation. In this scenario, the insolvency practitioner takes place as the liquidator. And his job is essentially, or her job is to sell the assets of the company and then use the realizations from those sales to pay the creditors, the expenses of the liquidation, and ultimately, end of that, the company is dissolved. There are similar sort of processes as well in place for individuals, so sole traders and partnerships as well, where they may get into difficulty, and you're looking at the equivalent. So, for example, an individual voluntary arrangement, or ultimately bankruptcy.
Thank you, Stephen. You've made those different meanings quite clear. And I want to ask you now about the title that you've chosen for this podcast. It's called Insolvency, the Phoenix from the Ashes of COVID-19. Now, that sounds relatively hopeful on a subject that can be viewed quite negatively. What's the point you're trying to make?
So it wasn't surprising when we learned last week that the Office for National Statistics had announced the economy is in recession. And clearly, as a result of the lockdown caused by coronavirus, we saw a number of businesses close, offices close, travel was shut down, people were furloughed. So the picture that we were told about last week was very much expected. But the UK government put in place a number of packages to hold the tide whilst we were going through that lockdown period. We saw things like the VAT payments that companies or individuals were having to pay being postponed. Furlough schemes were announced by the government so employers could retain their staff. And then we also saw the availability of some very cheap lending, form of bounce back loans and C-bills. But ultimately, all of this has led to the national debt increasing. And as with all debts, they're going to need to be repaid one day. So it's hoped that many of the businesses that are in financial trouble that have just been caused by COVID-19 will return to their pre-COVID financial health. They'll be in a good position to clear off those liabilities so that, for example, when the postponed VAT needs to be repaid, they've got sufficient money there to be able to pay that to HMRC. Or they're looking at traditional lending, for example, raising a loan secured against their assets and then paying off that loan through trading out of that difficulty caused by COVID-19. But unfortunately, I can see that there's going to be a severe impact on other companies, other businesses. There are certain sectors that I can't see returning to normal in the short term. The classic is going to be the leisure and travel industry and the entertainment industry as well, where they've effectively lost their boom period of trade. The summer months are so important to them, and they help see them through the winter. And with people not traveling, flight numbers being down, hotels remaining empty, those businesses are really going to struggle through the next few months. And to exacerbate that problem, then they've got to be thinking about planning for summer 2021. And they don't know if we're going to have another lockdown. So they could end up spending a lot of money getting themselves in the position to be able to trade for next summer and find that they're in the same scenario that they've been hit with this summer. So against all of that uncertainty, there's a lot of risk for them and a question of, are they going to be able to get through this? So why I see the sort of insolvency as the phoenix from the ashes of COVID-19 is that approaching that insolvency practitioner may end up being invaluable because they can talk them through the tools at their disposal, the terminology that I mentioned earlier, the administrations, the CVAs, the individual voluntary arrangements, just to create some temporary breathing space or looking at a way of restructuring so that they end up being a much stronger business in the future by going through that insolvency process. And I can see the insolvency profession changing from being that traditional grim reaper view they're probably always been seen as in the past as actually being that vaccine to protect the health and economy that's been harmed by COVID-19.
From what you've said, Stephen, there are essentially both positive and contentious insolvency situations that businesses might face. So describe what you mean by contentious. Give us a few examples of how things have gone badly.
Yeah, so there's a contrast here between that sort of the positive side of the insolvency profession in looking at being able to restructure the business so it can continue to operate. However, there's also another side to that is the contentious side, where the insolvency practitioner needs to look at investigating the affairs of the company and why it might have ended up becoming insolvent and needing to take action because of that.
From what you've said, Stephen, there are essentially both positive and contentious insolvency situations that businesses might face. So describe what you mean by contentious. Give us a few examples of how things have gone badly.
Sure. So I was describing sort of the positive side of the of insolvency, where you're looking at restructuring the business and then trying to get it out of the financial difficulty. But another important role of the insolvency practitioner is to consider and investigate what has gone wrong, what's gone bad. And this is the contentious side where I've become involved. So my role will be to assist the insolvency practitioner in that investigation. So it could be looking through the accounts of the company and finding out, have there been any sort of sales of sort of some major assets, or have some certain liabilities been paid off in preference to others? And sort of in those situations, the insolvency laws are there in place to protect the creditors of the company who may lose out because, for example, a director may have decided that he wants to pay a friend off who's a supplier that's owed quite a lot of money, and so decide that to pay them rather than other creditors, which is unfair. So the insolvency practitioner is going to be looking at those types of transactions and instructing me to then assist them in looking to be able to recover that money or bring claims against directors or connected third parties. Similar things can happen, that you see sort of major assets of the business, like, for example, the machinery suddenly being transferred out, not necessarily at the value that it would get in a true arm's length situation. And so again, we're looking at bringing a claim to be able to recover money to bring back into the estate. And that's sort of, quite an important part of the insolvency practitioner's role in these situations.
It's been really interesting exploring the topics of insolvency with you in so much detail, Stephen, and looking at how they can be positive if approached early enough and properly. For those watching, can you give a quick takeaway summary of the most important things to remember if your business can't pay its bills?
Yeah, so for those owner-managed businesses out there, I really think prevention is better than cure. So trying to not end up in the situation. So keeping a monthly or weekly view on your management report, reviewing that management information. The classics of cash is king. So chasing up those unpaid invoices and keeping the pressure on. Maybe if payments need to be taken on account for companies that perhaps might be struggling and that you don't want to be in the situation of being an unsecured creditor in their insolvency. I think sort of when you've come to the realization actually that there is a serious financial problem here, then do engage with those insolvency practitioners as early as possible. There is no one size fits all, that there are various insolvency practitioners for various different types of businesses. I've worked with ones that specialize with the sort of the SME market and the owner managed business, right up to sort of the big four that will be looking after the high street names that have entered into the process. But yeah, speak to them early on. They'll be able to sort of guide you through what's the sort of the best routes to be taken. And really, the aim is there to try and help and keep that business going. I'm obviously more than happy to sort of assist in sort of identifying the right people. We've got connections with a number of insolvency practitioners, so you can sort of put some names forward to help those owners and directors in this process.
Oh, that's good to hear. So if people need advice on potential insolvency, Stephen, who should they contact at Thursfields?
Yeah, no, please do reach out to me. Either contact me on 0121 726 8782 or ping me an email on it's srome@thursfields.co.uk.
Stephen Rome, a Director in Dispute Resolution at Thursfields Solicitors and an expert in contentious insolvency matters, Many thanks for joining us on Thursfields Talk Legal.
Thank you.
Hopefully what Stephen had to say about insolvency is something that people will find useful. We'll be back soon to talk to more legal experts here at Thursfields about other interesting aspects of the legal world. Thursfields Talk Legal. Thanks for listening.